Howdy, this is Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Wow, things are, of course, playing out as we've been predicting they would. We've got the various central banks putting on their kabuki costumes and getting ready to go out on stage and perform their ritualistic nod to the need to raise rates, followed by their ritualistic denial that they are able to raise rates, followed by massive quantitative easing, money printing, and hyperinflation. Once again, oh boy, it gets so entertaining. Yes.
Max, that sounds very spooky. And it's probably because everybody's spooked, perhaps because of Halloween, perhaps because of the data coming out, that even that data, those signals can't be hidden. Suddenly, hawkish Bank of Canada ends QE moves rate hikes forward. 1 year and 2 year yields spike, spooked by inflation not being temporary. Also spooked is the Fed, because GDP growth was only up 2% in the third quarter, not the 7% that it was expected by Goldman Sachs.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So the rate raises that they should have done 10 years ago, 9, 8, 7 years ago, 6, 5, 4 years ago, 3, 2, 1 year ago, that never took place. They kicked the can down the road. They increased the problem. And once again, they're going to talk about raising rates, or they will tinker at the margins, and markets will crash because we're in this hyper leveraged environment now for the first time ever in history to this extent. And then they're going to come back and they're going to say, oh, actually, we need to do a massive quantitative easing and massive money printing once again, because you cannot taper a Ponzi scheme.
Right. So here is the headline. It's very spooky. U.S. Treasury 30-year yield falls below 20 years for the first time. This is what a time to watch lines. So this is the first time in history things are getting spooky.
Right. So you've got interest rate inversion on the, spread of interest rates over that curve, interest rate curve inversion. And as the economy becomes almost impossible to navigate, the Bermuda Triangle of global finance, where up is down and down is up in the 20 years, less than the 10-year, more dislocations, more chaos, resulting in greater supply chain interruptions, greater bank failures, greater social unrest as we head into kind of the wood chipper of all, the mother of all financial wood chippings.
Well, speaking of wood chippings, some might say, including ourselves, that the U.S. dollar is headed for the wood chipper, or at least the, some sort of cremation. And that would suggest that El Salvador might have been right to buy the dip. So when Bitcoin fell, El Salvador bought the dip, according to Nayib Bukele, the president.
Right. Well, he is openly mocking the IMF. He said he was waiting for Bitcoin to come in to a better price range. It did. And he loaded the boat. He bought more Bitcoin, and he's on balance up on his Bitcoin position. He's making a fool out of the IMF. He's making a fool out of all the central bankers. He's giving his country something that no other country has, and that is sovereignty, true sovereignty based on unconfiscatable wealth. He's the George Washington of the 21st century. He'll go down in history as one of the brightest, sharpest presidents ever. And what more can be said about this guy? He's a genius.
A genius indeed. Of course, he announced on Twitter, and the Twitter CEO, Jack Dorsey, had the week before mentioned the H word, the hyperinflation, which has spooked many economists, spooked many commentators and other CEOs. I think once you get the industrial class, the industrialist class starting to mention the H word, we know from history, if anybody has read history, what you find with Weimar Germany was that it was the industrialists who started to act first on hyperinflation. And so, as we head into the spooky times of hyperinflation, here's a very spooky headline along those lines, because it's still at the turning point where we're still celebrating these sort of headlines without understanding the implications of hyperinflation. Elon Musk is on track to become the first trillionaire thanks to SpaceX. Morgan Stanley analysts predict the world's richest man will become even richer. So they're saying, Morgan Stanley is saying that he will become a trillionaire because of SpaceX, not because of Tesla. Tesla, he's already worth $300 billion. He's made more in the past 9 months than Warren Buffett has made his entire investing life. So he's worth close to $300 billion. He might be worth a trillionaire. But we all might be trillionaires soon. Like, it's happened in other countries, Zimbabwe being one of them, and we're going to turn to something from 2015 by then. But what do you think of Elon Musk becoming a trillionaire, Max?
Right. A lot of people in Zimbabwe are trillionaires. They have the actual $1 trillion banknote. So almost everyone in Zimbabwe is a trillionaire. It's also an issue with Elon Musk of corporate governance. As people know, as the stock price goes up, his options kick in, and he ends up getting more of a percentage of the company, and therefore has absolute control over the company. And in a way, in an era when a lot of regulators are also stakeholders and shareholders in these companies, so there's a corporate governance issue as well. But yeah, he's heading toward trillionaire status. And but in fiat money terms.
Just so you see how a person could go from a trillionaire, that it seems silly to say, well, this guy's going to be a trillionaire and he might not be worth anything tomorrow. We're going to cut to this headline from 2015, and it's from Zimbabwe. I was a quadrillionaire in Zimbabwe, but could barely afford to buy bread. After years of international isolation, hyperinflation in Zimbabwe hit a record 500 billion% in 2008. Instead of buckling under pressure, Robert Mugabe's government came up with a brilliant solution: print money on demand. Known for his populism, Mugabe made a wild promise to his followers. He said, quote, "Where money for projects has not been found, we will print it," which is spookily like what we're seeing today in the United States. When they demonetize, so we're gonna go over the period from 2008 to 2015 is when they demonetized, and they got rid of all those zeros at the end of their Zimbabwe dollar. According to the demonetization exercise, bank accounts with a balance of between 0 and 175 quadrillion Zimbabwe dollars were paid a flat fee of $5. So if you had some people there had only 10 Zimbabwe dollars. Some had 175 quadrillion. They each got $5 in their bank accounts in exchange for whatever they had in there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great reset.
That's a great reset.
Right?
And it could be coming if hyperinflation happens. And hyperinflation, it's not really like you can predict precisely when it's going to happen, because it's a shift in enough mindsets. Like, enough people change their mindset and lose faith in the currency. And it's that last monkey that converts and no longer has faith in it, and the whole thing crashes.
Right. Well, when all the price signals completely break. So if the yield curve is broken and the 30-year bond is yielding less than the 10-year bond, and you have trillionaires running around, and you have the Bureau of Labor Statistics openly misreporting all kinds of data, GDP is miscalculated, insider trading and manipulation by Bank of England, Federal Reserve Bank, insider trading. So you end up with a situation where you have to reset. You have to start the game over again. It just a big tilt flashes up there, and it's like, okay, you've got to reset the game because the game is irreparably broken. And that's going to completely change the complexion of the economy. And for the most part, anyone holding fiat money or fiat securities will have to accept close to 0 cents on their dollars.
Yeah. And in a way, we almost have sanctions, right? Sanctions have caused hyperinflation in Venezuela, in Iran, in Syria, in other countries, and by default in Lebanon, which relies on a lot of trade with Syria and Iran, for example. So here we have a situation where, for all intents and purposes, you have the same thing. There's almost like supplies can't get in. So there's nowhere for that money to go. There's no goods to be had. So we have a shortage of goods and services, but we have these huge programs, just like we saw in Venezuela, huge social programs. So the Biden administration is passing these social programs and they're looking for the money and nobody is willing to pay for these social programs. So this brings me back to this 2015 article about what happened in Zimbabwe when this guy went from being a quadrillionaire to being a nonaire. After years of international isolation, hyperinflation in Zimbabwe hit a record 500 billion% in 2008. Instead of buckling under pressure, Robert Mugabe's government came up with a brilliant solution: print money on demand. Known for his populism, Mugabe made a wild promise to his followers. Quote, he said, "Where money for projects has not been found, we will print it."
Right. Well, that's MMT, magic money tree here in America. One of the consequences of censorship, and censorship is running rampant in the United States with deplatforming and certain topics that are taboo and you can't say certain words anymore, is that it destroys price signals in markets as well. So when you destroy open communication outside of markets, that feedback mechanism means that the price signals you have in your markets are also wrong, inconsistent, and going to defraud and displace everybody in that economy as well. So when people hear like gas prices are rising and that they don't understand it's due to money printing, and they start to hear misinformation about the root causes of this, they are mobilized in ways politically that end up hurting them not only financially, but politically as well. Brexit's a great example. They were lied about Brexit, and now they ended up being isolated from the world over there in Britain, and it's compounding, and gas prices are zooming higher, and shortages are developing, and it could have been avoided.
Right. And, their former central banker at the time in Zimbabwe also had an accurate assessment of what was happening in the economy, but he was quite transparent and open about what they were actually doing versus what, Jay Powell is saying about what they're doing with all the money printing, all the QE, all the free money for Wall Street. The central bank started printing money at will, added or removed zeros. Former central bank governor Gideon Gono, who was the country's chief economist, called it the casino economy. We quickly became a country of millionaires, billionaires, and millionaires and quadrillionaires in no time, I think he meant to write. So he himself called it the casino economy, the guy printing the free money.
Yeah, absolutely. But the purchasing power of that free money goes to zero. And it's a cognitive dissonance. You're like, I'm a quadrillionaire, but a cup of coffee costs 9 trillion gazillion billion, right? So garbage in, garbage out. Remember that from 20 years ago? That was a popular idiom. Hey, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn it back to Tyson Slocum of the Public Citizens Energy Program in Washington, D.C. Tyson, welcome back.
Always great to be here, Max.
All right, let's talk oil and gas. Natural gas prices are rocketing all over the world, with Europe getting hit hard. Of course, the U.S. media is blaming Russia, but it seems a perfect storm of depleted inventories following a cold winter last year, an avalanche of freshly printed money, and not enough wind renewables caused prices to increase fivefold. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there's another issue going on here, and that's the price formation in natural gas markets. So we all remember the scandals with LIBOR, which was a voluntary reported index that all the big banks manipulated. The same exact structure is involved with natural gas spot markets in the United States, where literally natural gas prices are determined by voluntarily reported trades to private proprietary data publishers like Platts. And these companies and traders voluntarily reporting their trades have lots of incentive to manipulate those prices. Our investigation during the February winter storm, where we saw prices go overnight from $3 per million cubic feet up to $1,000 and more, we found that a number of key benchmarks reported only 2 trades that determined that $1,000 benchmark price. That's not a competitive, transparent market. That's a forum for market manipulation. And Congress actually gave federal regulators tools to replace these indexes with a more transparent system. And so I filed a petition to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in June of this year, asking regulators to take this action, get rid of these voluntary reporting price indices, and replace it with a more functioning, transparent market.
Now, Tyson, last time you were on was actually in response to what was going on in the oil markets with negative price prints in those markets, which of course is impossible. It's the result of manipulation. And so you're saying that we're seeing that again in the gas market. You referenced the LIBOR market, of course, was proven to be manipulated. We know it's been happening in the precious metal markets, gold and silver. We know that it's happened in the Forex market. We know that in the case of the LIBOR, Bank of England was implicated, a central bank. Going back even further, we know what the company Enron did before it went bust. They were manipulating prices. And market manipulation is a huge problem. And it seems to go back to this fact, again, to the central bank that's kept interest rates artificially low. And therefore, the price of manipulating markets by borrowing money is near zero. So the cost of fraud is zero. And, if the price of commodities are going up and if the price of gas is being manipulated higher, how can the central bank justify both runaway inflation and no response in terms of raising interest rates? You see what I'm saying? Like those two things never go together unless you're committing a massive fraud, Tyson.
You're right. These commodity price movements are exposing some serious central bank weaknesses. And I think, one of the responses has to be to ensure that these markets are adequately regulated. They're not the negative price disaster that we saw in crude oil last year was crazy. And it was a product of the fact that these contracts, which most people use for pure financial speculation, contain clauses that allow the counterparty to insist on physical delivery. And so as all the storage tanks in Cushing and elsewhere got full, all of these financial speculators got spooked that, wow, I might have to actually physically deliver oil. And so this resulted in this massive swing in oil prices. That's not a well-designed or well-functioning market. And so we've got systemic problems here that all boil down to really poor market design and inadequate supervision over very sophisticated speculators and other financial players in these commodity markets.
All right. So in the space of our interview here, we've identified a few things here. Number one, the remit for the central bank is full employment and price stability. Nowhere is it mentioned in their charter having anything to do with climate change or climate considerations, but they seem to be targeting that as a justification for massive money printing, which seems to help out their friends on Wall Street. And we've identified that they're involved in misreporting, manipulation, and outright fraud. So why aren't you down at the Eccles building in D.C. lobbying them to stop committing fraud? Because it's killing people.
Well, I am doing some work with JP Morgan where we think that they're in violation of their bank holding company charter. The Federal Reserve requires bank holding companies like JP Morgan not to own physical energy assets. And we've exposed a scandal where JP Morgan in fact does control about a dozen power plants and even a monopoly utility called El Paso Electric. So the Fed has been asleep at the switch on an awful lot of things, and we're pushing for greater accountability and greater regulation over our energy market.
Right. I mean, that seems to be a great focus of the efforts. I mean, you can't build an economy, like you can't build a house if everybody building the house has a separate yardstick, a separate measuring tool to try to figure out how to build that house. You can't have an economy if you've got everybody in the regulatory agencies applying different standards of the law. right? So there's clearly a reinterpretation of statutory law going on by various regulators who have taken it upon themselves to interpret the law. And we know this is happening on Wall Street for years because they commit fraud and then they retroactively change the law. Famously, when Citibank bought Travelers Corp, violated Glass-Steagall, and then got the law changed proactively in the past to make that okay. And that opened a floodgates of this kind of behavior. We've got lawmakers in Washington, in your town, who don't obey the law, break the law, revise the law, and are committing massive fraud. I mean, that's the problem, is corruption. You know, I don't know if you know Lawrence Lessig or not, but he's a very smart fella who was involved in the copyright industry for years and is in D.C. now lobbying for regulators to obey the law. Is it too much to ask as an American that our regulators are not kleptocratic, law-breaking, Soviet Union style, complete? Is that too much to ask?
It sure isn't, Max. And there's no question that, you know, it persists that we've got sort of two justice systems, one for the powerful and the well-connected, and one for the rest of us. And while all of us have to obey the laws or else the book gets thrown at us, for the powerful, they're allowed to routinely break the laws and get away with it. And so we need to be tough, not just on the regulators that aren't doing their duty, but on these corporate wrongdoers who time and time again commit massive frauds against the American people and their investors, and time after time walk away with not a scratch, especially for the top executives. That's got to change. We've got to have strong accountability for the most powerful in our country if we're going to make progress.
All right. So to bring this back to climate change in the area that you're lobbying for, doesn't climate change just become a PR stunt for these law-breaking kleptocrats that run America? You know, I remember back in the 70s, heroin dealers in Harlem would give away turkeys every Thanksgiving, and people loved them while they're selling them dope, right? Here you got Nancy Pelosi, equivalent to a Harlem heroin dealer of the 1970s, breaking the law, giving away money to her friends, trading on inside information, openly, scandalously acting as anti-American. She's worse than any Chinese spy, which she, by the way, employs in her office, or had recently.
I don't know if I agree with these assertions about Nancy Pelosi. I've had my criticisms of her. I don't know if I'd characterize it the way that you just did, however.
Okay, well, I'll let history be the judge of this. You know, so far I'm batting 1,000. In 13 years I've been doing this show. Every freaking kleptocrat I've clawed out within 3 years has either, faced serious jail sentence. Now let's talk about lithium. Lithium ore, it's needed to deliver electric cars. A great deal of the U.S. supply is on sacred tribal lands in Nevada. They don't want mining. I think lithium was the reason we were in Afghanistan, Tyson. We lost that. We left $85 billion worth of military hardware. I did the math. That's $200 of that was from me personally. Left.
Well, I hope you get your refund check
in
back.
Kabul. So, I left $200 in Kabul, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt. What about lithium, Tyson? What's the lithium deal? What's the story there?
Yeah, so Max, you're raising a very important point, and that is we've got to have far better standards within the industry, and we've got to have much better regulations federally on the sourcing of the components for batteries and other material like we have in solar photovoltaics. This isn't necessarily a huge impediment to having electric vehicles sustainably, but we have to do it right. And, are electric vehicles, more sustainable than their fossil fuel automobile equivalents? Yes, they are. But does that mean that they're totally sustainable? Of course not. They, as you correctly point out, there are a number of serious challenges involved with the mining of the components like lithium that are necessary for batteries. And so, again, this is something that can be addressed through stronger standards and regulations, and also an understanding that, as I said earlier, we're not going to address climate change by just swapping out, hundreds of millions of internal combustion engine vehicles for electric drivetrain vehicles. We have to get away from the individual vehicle as a primary mode of transportation and emphasize greater use and expansion of mass transit options. That's going to be way more sustainable in terms of the inputs used for the transportation sources than 300 million new private electric vehicles.
What about bicycles, Tyson? You killed two birds with one stone. All these fat, obese American slobs who get COVID because they're fat and obese. Oh, can't say that. All right, Tyson, thanks for being on Keiser Report. I see you're still down there in D.C. I don't know how you do it. You must have a huge supply of vomit bags ready to go at your disposal dealing with this stuff, but God bless you. Thanks for being on the show.
Always great to be here, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Tyson Slocum. Until next time, bye, y'all.